So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May webinar from Brenta. We love doing these just to help the early years sector. Today, we are really privileged to have two of His Majesty's inspectors. Phil has already joined us, Phil Minns, and Wendy Ratcliff is our other inspector who will hopefully be joining us shortly as well. Today, they're going to take a deep dive into the Ofsted's Best Starts survey that they've done in live research, and it also focuses on raising the quality of early years education from birth to 4 years. They'll also discuss recent changes to the Inspection Handbook, including those to reflect the DfE's changes to the EYFS, and they answer some questions that we've already had from yourselves. There won't be a Q&A at the end. There will just be the questions that's already been pre-sent. Due to time restrictions as well, they will, like I said, there will only be those questions that they will answer for us. Phil, if you wanted to then start, I'll get my colleague Katie to share your slides with us.
No, thank you. So, yeah, if we could start on slide 9, then that's my bit. Yeah, so good morning, everyone. So my name's Phil Minns. I'm a senior His Majesty's Inspector at Ofsted. My work is very much based on the sort of policy that we do, and it's policy across all young children. So whether those children are in a nursery with a childminder or in a school, if they've got an early years setting in a school, looking at the quality of education, actually, what those children are learning and the support they get and the help they get to learn and develop. So that's my job, which I like very much, and it's very nice to be able to speak to you all this morning. Wendy will be with us soon. She'll introduce herself when she gets here. She's currently in a very stressful position, which I was in a couple of minutes ago as well, trying to get into a meeting that you can't get into. It's like being locked outside a room. So yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of an update from slide 9 on the best start in life. And this is what we've called our research review. So we've done research into all of the areas of the curriculum for schools. So we've done research into geography and history and maths and all of them. And it's not sort of working out what we think, it's actually their research review. So what we do is we look at what all of the most relevant literature and researchers have said, whichever place in whichever university and whichever researcher. We look at them all and then we draw that together and we sort of say, well, when we take all of these things together, what does it actually tell us? So the research reviews that we do aren't about us sort of telling you what to do. It's much more about saying, well, this is what the research says is good. So if you know what is supposed to be good and we know what's supposed to be good, then it makes it easier. Because basically our bottom line around inspection is don't do anything for Ofsted, just do what's right for your children. So we hope that this sort of research helps us all to clarify what those things are. And I'll take you through the sort of the edited highlights. I could speak about this for a long, long time, but I'll just try and stick to the sort of key points. So on the next slide, what you'll see are the two copies. Oh, can I move that slide? Oh, there we go. So when we looked at the areas of learning in the early years foundation stage, obviously there are 7. Initially, we thought, well, does that mean we've got to do 7 research reviews? Because there's a lot to cover. But we decided not to do that. We decided that we'd break it down into 3 parts instead, more for our own sanity, really, than anything else, because there was such a lot to cover. So part 1 there is very much setting the scene, sort of big picture stuff. Then part 2 was looking at the prime areas in more detail. And then part 3, which we haven't published yet, is all about the specific areas. And also in part 3, what we're able to do is go back over the whole piece and look at some of the really big messages that we think will help everybody. And that's really what these are designed to do. These are designed to sort of clarify and help, make it a bit clearer about what really children need if we're going to genuinely give them the best start in life. Sadly, since we've called this the best start in life, other people have started calling other things the best start in life as well. We would like to pretend that we invented it first. I'm not sure that we did, but we hold on to it anyway. I can see that my friend Wendy is in the room now, which is a good relief for her and for me. Morning, Wendy.
Good morning. Yeah, and apologies for that. So technical issues there. I'm guessing that you're cracking on with the presentation. So brilliant.
Yeah, and we thought, Phil. So then we can go back and you can do the other update in a minute.
Perfect.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll take you through now some of those key messages from these two parts. So on the next slide, just before we get into that, I want to go back actually to the original research that informed the changes to the inspection framework, which were introduced in 2019. It feels like a very long time ago now. And so when we wrote the current Inspection Handbook, there was a body of research that was looked into to find out what actually we should be looking at in more depth. And the current handbook that we've got is the most research based or evidence-based inspection handbook that we've ever had. So it really does try to look at what quality of education is and what that means for children. And one of the pieces of sort of cornerstones really of that research was identifying what a curriculum was. And basically, our definition of a curriculum, which we found from research, was here. It's a program of education, including the knowledge and skill that need to be gained at each stage. So basically, it's a curriculum is anything that any plan that you've got to get children or anybody actually to know something, to be able to do something, and the steps that you're going to take them through to do it. You might be working with children where you want them to be able to go and use the toilet on their own, or that you're trying to potty train them. Well, you don't just do that in one lump, do you? You think about what do they need to be able to do first? Well, they need to be able to cope with their clothes, then they need to be able to find the place. They need to recognize that sensation that if they need a wee, all of those things. And that you're building that in, and that becomes your curriculum. This is what I want them to learn at the end. And these are the things, this is how I'm going to get them there. So that's our definition of curriculum, and it includes not only what you want children to learn, but also how you're going to get them to learn it. It puts those two things together. We think about that you might have heard us talk about the 3 I's. There's intent, which is what you want them to learn, implementation, which is you actually sort of delivering it, and then impact, which is has it worked? Do I need to do some more? Do I need to tweak what I'm doing? But I think it's worth just thinking about that before we go into the next slide. And on the next slide, you'll see these are the main messages from the first part of the research. So from part 1. And part 1, as I said, really sort of try to get the big picture. Now, we've got a lot of different issues in the early years. Teaching young children is very, very complicated. It's much more complicated than people who aren't working with young children think. I always think when you look at sort of the age of children, people think that working with teenagers or doing A levels is the more complicated. But actually, the younger the child, the more complex it is, because children are learning sort of things all together. But anyway, these are the key messages. The first one there is that the curriculum needs to cover all children. So when you're thinking about what you want children to learn, the key thing there is what we want all children to learn. Because some children will come in knowing more than others and will have a head start. Some children come in being able to use scissors, other children don't. Some children come in knowing how to dress themselves, other children don't. And our curriculum, if we're going to be ambitious for them, we need to have the same ambitions for all of them. And that means that some children will need more help than others. The second one there is about adults thinking about what children already know and can do. And that's sort of that taking that same example on, isn't it? You know that some children come in with more knowledge than others. And so we have to take that into account. And it's starting where the child is and thinking, well, I want this child to be able to do this more complicated thing, but actually they're quite a long way away from it at the moment. So what's the first step for them based on what that child can do? The third one there, children with gaps get extra help. That's just saying, some children need more help than others, and we need to make sure that they get it. The next one, practitioners consider a child's interests when choosing an activity. That's really important. And it's quite a complicated one because we would all want children to be doing activities that they're interested in. But if you've got a group of children who come in who just want to play with the Lego, and we never got them to do anything else, then we wouldn't be giving them the full curriculum. They might be very happy playing with the Lego every day. Other children might never want to go near the Lego. So we need to, that whole thing, about where a child's particularly interested in, I don't know, princesses or dinosaurs or something, and you use that to get them to do this new activity. Almost at the bottom there, children's play is valued. that we talk quite a lot about play in part one. Play is really, really important, and it's not just one thing. You know, there's guided play, there's free play, there's what you might think of more sort of a direct instruction, you know, where you're showing children, you know, those children who can't use a pair of scissors, you show them how to do it. And all of those things can be put into this idea of play, but it's much more complicated than just simply thinking play is one thing. You know, there's all sorts of different levels. And then the last one, they're about explicit teaching. That's like the scissor thing. You know, children, if they can't do something, and like using a pair of scissors, you got to show them it. You just show them it. You don't leave them to sort of develop that understanding on their own, because it just takes too long. You know, it's much better for some things for children just to be shown how to do it. So that's the key message from part one. Then part two was really focused on the prime areas of learning. And on this next slide, you'll see this is the summary, and I'll go into a bit more detail about this as we go along. We deliberately split prime from specific so that we could just look at those three prime areas on their own. And what you can see here, the main findings here, they're crucial and they're interlinked. You can't, I mean, I'm going to talk to you about the three prime areas on three separate slides. And when we did the research, we looked at them in the three separate areas. But that was because it would have been madness for us to try and do it all together. It would have been far too complicated. But you'll see if you read them, and you know, you can just Google Best Start in Life Ofsted, and these will all come up. And they're not too long. We've tried to keep them shortish. But you'll see we constantly link language and communication to PSED, to physical development. You know, they're all so linked together, particularly the younger the child. You know, babies, all these things happen together at the same time. But they are crucial. And when we say crucial, it's sort of stating the obvious, really, but it's for all children. That's where we really need to recognise that actually we need to make sure that all children have the same access to these prime areas and get the development that they need. So communication and language are fundamental, and they're fundamental to so much more than just simply talking. You know, we think it's about talking, but actually it's about thinking. It's about what language and communication is often how children make sense of the world and understand it. You know, that idea that the way that we store ideas or concepts is by naming them and then remembering the name. You know, I'm not sure if we've probably done it before with you. We use a Cherokee word, gigagay, which is the Cherokee word for red, and we show people how you actually learn that concept and then you store it in your brain through labeling it with a word. And that's how then you sort of store that piece of information. So communication and language is so much more than simply being able to ask and answer questions or describe things. It's actually, a lot of it is actually the level of understanding we have, how we understand what's going on around us, what's happening to us. Then PSED, it underpins everything. You know, it is the foundation upon which everything else is based. You know, if we're not feeling happy, we are not learning, we're not getting on, we're not, you know, if we're not happy in the sort of, you know, comfortable, contented, safe thing, then you can have the best activities in the world, but we're not going to learn much because we've got that basic need not being met. And I'll talk a bit more about that as when we get onto that stage, because executive function has really come through as something very strong in all of these reports. And then the last one there, physical development, which actually is the thing that we think is often given the least attention. Because we see children running around all over the place all the time, and most children physically will be able to do the sort of average things we expect them to be able to do by the time they're 4. So when we come to any sort of assessment, people always tend to say, oh yeah, physical tick. But actually, when we look at the data we've got, you know, like the increase in child obesity and all these things, you know, children who are 4 or 5 who aren't very active at all, the big picture is telling us something different. And so that's an area that we really need to look at, particularly around gross motor. But what I'll do is I'll go in and give you a little bit of information on each of those 3 areas in a bit more detail. So on the next slide, there's a bit more stuff about communication and language. And this is so important. As I said before, you know, it's how we all store information. It's how we all remember things, and it's so much about how we make sense of the world around us is through the words that we use, whether we're saying them or listening to them or just using them in our head to understand things. Now, children learn to speak and to listen. They learn that language automatically. They're sort of pre-programmed in their brains are pre-programmed to do it. But it depends on the amount of language that they hear. So you need to hear a lot of it so that you can learn it, because that's how we learn it, by hearing it over and over and over again. So if you've got children coming into you who haven't got the same amount of language as others, who don't have the same confident understanding of words, they need more. And that's why this first bullet point is so important. Communication and language needs careful and deliberate planning. You need to think, how are we actually supporting these children to develop their communication and language? What opportunities do we use? Second one there is this link between communication and language and social and emotional well-being. They are just the same. You know, if I am changing a baby's nappy and I'm making eye contact and I'm trying to make them laugh and I'm making noises and they're making noises and I'm going backwards and forwards, I'm developing communication and language. But at exactly the same time, doing exactly the same stuff, I'm developing that emotional link. They're learning about adults and how adults care for them and how adults are interested in them. So those two things are hugely linked. And if we want children to feel a sense of well-being, then by talking to them and being interested in them, by giving them attention, that's part of how that builds. The third one on there, introducing and embedding vocabulary and language structures needs careful thought. That's in the EYFS, it's really clear. Children need the opportunity to learn new words, to practice new words, to practice their understanding of new words, and also structures. Because of course, words are only, one part of it. Actually, we make sense of those words by hearing them surrounded by other words. There's a big difference between go and shut the door to reading a book that says the door is red. The door in those two scenarios is the same thing, but actually the surrounding information is very different. So we need to think about how that is learned, and that's not, and we've said this, I've probably said it to you before as well, that's not through thinking about word lists or putting words on the walls. It's actually about making sure that children have lots and lots and lots of opportunities to interact with adults and have those high quality interactions, and also to hear songs, rhymes, stories, whether that's from a book or whether that's somebody reading it out loud to them. That's how they hear all this complex stuff. And the last one in there is a really key message about practice makes permanent. We used to think that practice, or people used to say practice makes perfect. That's not what we're interested in. It's permanent. The more times you practice something, the easier it becomes, because it becomes automatic. You think about riding a bike, you practice and then you can ride a bike without thinking about it. And that's what we need our youngest children to be able to do with communication and language. They need to be able to say what they think without having to spend too long thinking about it, because they just know so many words. So that's a nice sort of summary of communication and language. I've slightly lost sight of time now, so I'm sure that I can see Wendy and Adele. So you just have to wave at me when I'm coming to the end.
That's
so I
okay.
don't go on
Don't
too
worry.
long.
We've got time. Don't worry.
Okay, so I'll move on to physical development next. And as I said before, this is the one that actually we think, particularly gross motor, isn't actually perhaps given the attention it needs to be. Have a think about it. You might be doing huge amounts of stuff, but I'll tell you this and then you can have a think about it as we get to the end. So what you need to do, and this all really comes from the EYFS, this is purely looking at what it says in the EYFS and then thinking, well, how can you actually deliver that? Because the EYFS is quite clear about what needs to be included. So when you're thinking about physical development, it's about identifying those small steps to build up to be able to do more complicated things. So, if we want them to be able to balance on some sort of bridge, then first of all, what they need to be able to do is balance on something that's on the floor. So they just can walk along a straight line and then you step them up. So it's all thinking about how you break that down to make it easier for them to learn. And also taking them from what they already know. Some children will come in physically confident, but a bit all over the place, because actually what they've got is a lot of physical confidence, but they haven't necessarily learned the control they need to avoid hitting into other things, the coordination, that sort of spatial awareness. Other children will come in without that level of physical confidence at all. They might almost be too nervous, too aware of the dangers of falling over, and they need to be supported to become a bit, faster or bigger. So it's really based on what they already know. Now, the second one here talks about explicit modeling. So they need to see basically you doing it. You need to model this for them so they can work out how it happens. And they also need the teaching of fundamental movement skills. Now, those fundamental movement skills are all the things that you can think about, which are to do with throwing, catching, running, hopping, standing still, moving, control, speed, all of those things. And they are the reason they're called the fundamental movement skills is because they're what every sort of thing later on comes on to. If you're going to want to be a runner or play football or hockey or whatever it is, all of it starts there. And actually, it's a real advantage. Huge amounts of research that show that those children who sort of get to the age of 4 or 5, having those basic fundamental movement skills in place, enjoying running around a bit, having the control to stop and start, playing things like musical statues, that gives them all of them the basic skills they need to go on and enjoy sports and take part in them and feel successful in them. So that's really important. And those are all gross motor skills. What we tend to see is the fine motor skills being taught in a much more specific way than gross motor skills. So, it doesn't happen everywhere, but what we tend to see is people having activities that are directly focused on children developing fine motor skills. But then when you get to gross, it tends to be a bit of a play area. Go and climb that or ride the bikes or do that. There isn't the same attention to, well, actually, how are we getting children to develop the specific skills we want them to have in gross motor? And there are some children who are more wobbly than others, some children who haven't got that same sense of coordination or the core strength. And that's sometimes the issue. There's some children haven't developed the core strength they need to be able to hold themselves up and balance on a beam. So how are you helping them to get that? If you're thinking about that now and you want to find out a bit more, just go back to the EYFS and look in the PD bit, because it tells you the things that need to be there, and that will start you thinking about this. And then read our research, because that will help. Thinking about that, I'm on to the bottom 2 here, that providing activities that deepen and extend a child's capabilities. If they're good runners, then actually are we making sure that they can run and turn? Can they stop and start? All of these things that, will add that, it will deepen and extend their confidence in that area, what they know and can do. And also, do we give children the space and time they need to practice these things? Do they actually get enough time? When we think, gross motor is part of PD, which is one of the prime areas, do they actually get enough time to practice that? And I'm not saying do they not spend enough time outside or whatever, but actually when they're outside, if that's where you think they're doing their gross motor, are they doing their gross motor skills when they're outside? Is that actually how they're spending their time? Because as a young child, I had no interest in doing any of that physical stuff at all. And if you sent me outside and there were books or, a bit of colouring, I would have done that. I wouldn't have gone and done the running around because it wasn't what I was interested in. But you need to just have an eye on people, don't you? That if you've got children who haven't got the same level, particularly of gross motor skill as others, when they're out in that area, are they actually doing what you want them to? And if they're not, how are you going to get them to do that and engage? So if I move on to PSED now, which is obviously the third prime area, there's a sort of big overarching key message in personal, social, and emotional development, which is that it's learned. And what we've found sometimes is that people think that it's sort of just either in you or it's not. But actually, all of those personal, social, and emotional skills that you develop are in exactly the same way as everyone else. You develop them by practicing them, by seeing other people doing them, and then learning how to do it yourself. And you will have children coming in with different levels of physical development, some who can run, some who can't. You'll have children coming in much more confident speakers than others. And in exactly the same way, you'll have some children who've got they're much more developed in their personal, social, and emotional than other children. And it's important to see those all the same. All of those situations are the same. You've got some children who've learnt more than others. So there's children who come in with lower levels of PSED, just haven't had the chance to learn it yet. So you need to think about how do you help them to learn it. This is what the sort of key findings of the research were. That it's really important that practitioners think about how you support children to develop warm, positive relationships and interactions. First thing there is through the modelling. That's really clear in the research. You model warm, positive relationships and interactions all the time, and that's what children learn. So actually, whilst you're sort of working with young children, you are constantly modelling, aren't you? So if you're, you know what it's like. If you're in a place where people shout, the children tend to shout, because they learn what they're doing. Or if they're in a place where it's a bit quieter, children tend to be quieter. Second one in there is children develop a positive sense of self. Now that's really, really, really important that you understand what that means. It's not about self-esteem. It's not about trying to make somehow a child's self-esteem big. Supporting children to get a positive sense of self is feeling good about themselves. So, and that's a lot of that is modeling from you as well, is always finding those things that you can point out to children that they are doing which is good or that's good about them. You know, we know that some children might receive more negative reinforcement than positive reinforcement. You know, some children in the old days would get told off more than others, and that is a negative reinforcement, whereas what we want is a positive reinforcement. So you're always trying to do that. The third one here is about helping children to develop an understanding of emotions, and that's a two-way street actually. So telling, children, sharing with children stories about people who are happy or sad, looking at the emotions that you might get in a story or from a song, helping children to understand and label emotions, helps them then to recognize that feeling when they have it. But the research is also clear that when those children have got those feelings, then you can also help them to understand it by talking to them about it then, by sort of labeling it for them. Oh, you probably feel sad because you're not getting to do that thing that you'd really like to do. You might be feeling a bit cross because you haven't been able to finish this thing because we've got to go and do this. So you can help them to understand that just by interacting with them and recognizing that they have those emotions and helping them to identify it and then sort of deal with it. That's the key thing as children get older, isn't it? Helping children to learn how to get along with each other. So important. You think about how important it is that children have can talk to others and build those friendships right from the very beginning. How do they learn to get those positive relationships with each other? And the last one in there about exploring and preparing and eating healthy food. So all of these things fit into PSED. The thing that we get into more detail about when we get into part 3 of the research, which will be published soon, is about executive function. And that's those things. Sometimes we would think around sort of self-control, issues of self-control, inhibition, stopping yourself from doing something that you want, stopping yourself from taking the last biscuit because you shouldn't, or starting and finishing a task, developing that ability to focus on an activity and see it through to the end. And some of it is also about being able to think something through and work out the sequence of events you've got to do to get to the end. So this is all executive function, and what it's about how your brain sort of manages, how we learn to manage ourselves, I suppose. And in exactly the same way that we just talked about with PSED and other things, children will come in with different levels of executive function. And that's because some children will have had more opportunities to practice it than others. You can't sort of teach executive function, but what you can do is help children to practice it, give them opportunities to practice it. So you'll see children practicing their executive function whenever they're doing anything that's a bit more, trying to finish a jigsaw. Because that's about sticking with it, carrying on to the end, thinking it through. So recognizing that and celebrating it is a good way of doing it, helping children do those things. It all supports executive function. And also that idea of inhibition, which stops us snatching something off somebody else or hitting somebody when we get upset. You develop, the research is quite interesting there, because the inhibition that it takes, say when you're doing musical statues, to actually stand still and stop yourself from moving, you're developing the same thing that you use later on to stop yourself from getting up and walking out, or from hitting somebody, or from slapping somebody. You know, all of these things, it's all the same stuff. So by giving children opportunities to play those sorts of games, we're helping them to develop some of these other things that are so important to the work that they do as they get older. Because of course, when you look, I always think, when you look at children who are not doing well in primary school, when they get into year 5 or year 6, so much of it will come down to their prime areas. So much of it will come down to the fact that they don't actually necessarily understand all the things that are going on, you know, because they haven't necessarily got the vocabulary to understand the complexity of what's going on. Or they haven't got the executive function, or some of the PSED, you know, they haven't really developed that ability to have friends and get on with people, or they haven't got the self-regulation to stop them snatching something from somebody else. You know, all of these things, these are the things that really get in the way for them when they're older. And so that's why these prime areas are so important. And it's so important that we really focus on them and give them the attention when children are young, because this is when they learn it. You know, children get their basic PSED and communication and language and physical stuff in this period of time. By the time they're 4 or 5, that's when the sort of foundations are built. Anyway, my last slide is just going to go on a bit about this idea of a curriculum by design, not chance. And that's what all of the research really comes back to, is saying that when we can all sort of, you know, lots of, when you look at, if you read the research, you'll see a lot of it just makes sense. A lot of, oh yeah, I can see that children need to learn this. The issue is we need to make sure that all children learn it, and that all children get the same chances. Even if they don't all get to the same place, we sort of recognize how important this is, and we gave those children the chance to learn this stuff. And that comes down to this idea of a curriculum by design, not by chance. Because some children will come in without the advantages of others. Some children will come in knowing less words, having less physical activity. They might come in not having had the same chance to develop their personal, social, emotional development. They might come in not having, you know, the skills they need to make friends straight away. All of these things. And we need to make sure that the curriculum takes that into account, so that when you're looking at all of these children, they all get the progress and support they need to move towards this, you know, what you want them to be able to do. You know, if you want them to be able to, you know, get on nicely with other children, to be able to start and finish a task, to be able to talk to you about what they like and what they don't like. If that's what you want them to be able to do by the time they finish with you, they all need the chance to do it. And that's about having a really clear idea of where they are when they come in, and then how you're going to get them to that end. So it's really thinking about curriculum by design, not chance. Particularly, that works for the most vulnerable children. Right, I think that's it. There's always a danger. Wendy always knows I could go on for too long, but I will hand over, Wendy, and then you can go back to the start of this presentation.
Back to the start. Brilliant. Okay. And I think one of the things that, from what you were saying there, Phil, is I think there's a really important message for us as well around our Best Start in Life research review, because there's not necessarily anything that you've shared with us there that people wouldn't know already. And actually, that's really important message, isn't it? Because one of the things that we're thinking is that by us saying it, we're hoping then that people realise that we're not looking for anything different. You know your children, you know where you want to get them to and what it is, you know their context. And actually, if you're doing what's right for your children, then you're doing what's right for Ofsted. But anyway, let's go back to some of these updates. So first of all, though, we just thought this was a really good opportunity when we're joining you today, just to say thank you. And you know, we know our new Chief Inspector, Sir Martin Oliver, he recognises that incredibly difficult job that you do to support, care and educate our youngest children. So you know, we really do want to thank you for your continuing hard work, that dedication and that professionalism. And, you know, your attendance just dialing in today, given, you know, the busyness of your work with our youngest children, is just that testament to your willingness to do everything you can for the children in your care. So, yeah, so really just a heartfelt thanks from us. But let's just give you some of our updates that we've been working on. So updates on Inspection Handbook, and I think we've got a question about this in a bit. And we've made some updates to our Inspection Handbook. We made some updates back in January, and then we've made some further updates in April. So one thing we would suggest is that when you're having a look at the Inspection Handbook, which ultimately is that guidance for our inspectors, it's how our inspectors go about their work when they come and do their early years inspection, but it's also there for you so that you can see and you can have a read and know what to expect from the inspection when that time comes. So one of the things that we have been doing, we have been making some updates to them. So back in January, we made clear some of our expectations for inspector conduct during an inspection. We clarified what our inspectors will do to ensure leaders and staff's well-being during inspections. And throughout the handbook, we've made clear references to the fact that inspection should be that professional dialogue that ensures that leaders and staff are shown the courtesy, respect and empathy that they deserve. We've also made some changes in the handbook in relation to our complaints procedure, and that was following a consultation that we carried out back in the summer last year. And then in April, we've just made some further updates to explain that process in terms of thinking about the process to follow for complaints, which we're come on to. So if we can just go on to the next slide. So as I say, it was back in the summer last year that we launched the consultation on some proposals to change our post-inspection arrangements and how we handle complaints. And that outcome was published in November last year. So if you want the detail of it, then have a look on the website so that you can get that information. But as a result of that consultation, we have published new guidance about how to submit a complaint about an inspection, a regulatory visit, or an incident. And these changes are now in place. So we've now, all inspectors have been given guidance on developing and formalising the important discussions and that professional dialogue that they should be having to make successful inspections. And as part of all inspections, we've been letting providers know that they can now contact us with any unresolved issues during an inspection, as well as the day after an inspection if you've got any unresolved concerns. Ultimately, though, the best thing to do on an inspection if you've got concerns is raise them directly with the inspector, but we have made some changes as well. And if you get the notification for an inspection, the inspector will take you through those. And then we've also made some changes for post-inspection arrangements since April. And so now when you receive a draft report, you can either highlight some minor points of clarity or a factual accuracy within your report that will be able to be resolved quickly, or that's the opportunity where you can make a formal complaint if things haven't gone as smoothly as we would expect. So let's just pop on to the next slide, because I won't go in detail on this because this is actually in our inspection handbook now, but it actually shows you that post-inspection and complaints procedure so that you can follow those steps through and be clear about what it is you need to be doing if you need to raise a concern with us. So let's just go on to the next slide. Okay, and finally, the other thing that we have done since in the update in April, we've updated the handbook so that we now refer to our deferring, pausing and gathering additional evidence policy in a single policy as well. And that sets out processes that inspectors should follow when considering whether or not a deferral's, you request a deferral, or whether there's a pause required in an inspection or a visit, or whether we need to come back and gather some additional evidence. But again, won't go into the detail because those policies and procedures are all available on our website. So if we could now just move through to the big listen slides, so slide 18, because that's something that we really do want everybody who's listening in today to take part in. So before we finish, we just want to tell you about our big listen, if you haven't already found out about it. This was launched back in March, and if we go on to the next slide, let's tell you a little bit about what it's all about. So it is a big, it's wide-reaching, comprehensive effort from us to hear from the full range of professionals and providers Ofsted we work with, as well as parents, carers, children and learners that we work for. So how can you get involved and what is it? So let's look at the next slide. So it really is an opportunity for us at Ofsted to hear from you, the professionals we work with, like teachers, carers, employers, social workers, and the people we work for, so parents, carers and children and learners. We want to hear your views on the priorities for Ofsted that are important to you. And then we're going to analyse all those responses that we get back and set out our plans later in the year. So we have launched a consultation that you can complete. And the things that we're asking about are around how we report following our inspections and our visits, how we actually carry out those inspections. We want to know about how we can have that positive impact on those sectors that we inspect. And we want to find out what is it that we need to do to be a world-class inspectorate and regulator that's trusted by parents, children and the sectors that we work with. So there is, what will you get to see? So there is several questions that we're asking as part of that consultation, but there are also free text boxes. So if those questions aren't getting to the things that you think you want to tell us about, then there are free text boxes so that you can let us know. We've also got some independently led surveys and focus groups happening, and we're also, obviously sharing things and hearing things from events like this one today. So if we just move on to the next slide, this is the QR code. And I do know that you'll be sent the slides after this event, so you'll be able to take part in that consultation, and would urge you to do that. There's just a couple of weeks left for you to share your views with us, because it closes on the 31st of May.
And is it worth just sort of adding into that and saying that at the moment we can see the responses and we can see where those responses are coming from. Early years is our biggest sector that we work with.
Absolutely, 63,000 providers.
Yeah, so you represent for us the biggest group of people that we work with, the biggest group of children that we work with as well, as far as different individual settings are concerned. And at the moment, we have had quite a lot more responses from schools than we've heard from early years, and we'd really like to bring the balance up a bit. So and the other thing is that you don't actually have to just say what you think should change. If there's something about stuff that we're doing at the moment that you think works, and you would want to keep a hold, yeah, please do that in as well, because there's a danger sometimes with these sorts of things that what we'd get is a list of things that people don't like, but then we don't necessarily get that information about the things that you think do work. And we're not saying that everything works, but if there are, but both of those things are valuable to us. So please do just get back in touch and let us know through this thing.
And I joined Martin the other week on a podcast, which again is available, and just to have a conversation around some of the things that we're hearing about that people are putting forward. And just a couple of things from there is there's something about notification periods. Have we got that right? It's a really tricky balance, I think. And And the other thing that we are hearing, a positive thing that we're hearing, is the work that's happened since January around all our inspectors having had mental health first training and taking account of leaders and staff's well-being. That's something people are telling us that they're noticing in their inspections more recently. So that's a positive as well. So let's just move through to the next slide, the next one. And again, this is just an opportunity just to make you aware of some of the things that we've got available for you, because one of the things that we are aware of is that, you know, that kind of like the anxiety that comes with an Ofsted inspection. So we want to put straight some of those inspection misconceptions and provide some reassurance about what to expect from your inspection. And there's a whole host of things that the team have been working on to try and help provide some of that reassurance. So you can see there, and again, you'll get these slides. If you scan that code, you'll get a list of all these various things. So there are some parent guides there. So how Ofsted inspects childminders, how Ofsted will inspect My Child's Day Nursery. Are there need to know guides? So there are frequently asked questions. And also we've got a Sam, who's an inspector in our team, has recorded some very short films that talk about some of those key inspection activities that happen. So, you know, what to expect from my learning walk. And what we're finding with some of those managers in settings, for example, are saying they're using those in team meetings, and that is helping to reassure staff about what to expect from their inspection when the inspector calls. So Adele, I think that is us. So yeah, over to you for our questions.
Thank you so much. I love these because it really gives an opportunity for you guys to really showcase the hard work that you do to support the sector. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's about collaboration. We have, obviously, as you know, we've had lots of questions, but we are just tight on time. So I'm going to start firing off to you and Phil, so you guys can decide who wants to answer them first. So the first one, I know you alluded to this one, was how is Ofsted taking into account the current recruitment crisis in the earlier sector, and how does that impact inspections? Do you take that into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely, we do, and we are, you know, we are aware of that the recruitment and retention issues that places are experiencing at the moment. And actually, it was last week, I think, that we published a blog. So if you, when you get the slides and you scan that QR code, there will be a blog about the you know, those challenges with recruitment and retention, those workforce issues at the moment. But very much our inspectors are take those things into account and that context into account when you know, yeah, during the inspection. So there, you know, if there are struggles, then, you know, making the inspector aware of that and the things that you've done to mitigate some of those challenges and those risks. Inspectors will be interested to find that out. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Phil.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, we've just finished the latest round of inspector training conferences that we do. We do them twice a year. Big focus on this time was about context, just sort of helping inspectors to really think through context, making sure that we're considering it. And one of the key issues that we'll want to find out when doing that initial call is, you know, are there things that are really affecting you at the moment? And if staffing is an issue, then, you know, let your inspectors know so that they can take that all into account. Interestingly, the report, the blog that Wendy just mentioned, what we found in there was there, you know, what's happening at the moment is a lot of people are being affected by this, but actually there are some places and some settings who have always had issues with turnover. And actually, it doesn't stop you from being a good or an outstanding place. It's just if you manage it. And that's what we found in this report, is the places that seem to manage it best really thought about, they prioritized. So they thought, if I've only got this person in for a day, what is the most important information they need to know? So, you know, the safeguarding, if you know, how we treat a child who gets upset. How do you keep
children safe here? Yeah.
That's your, if they're going to be with you for a week or more, then okay, I'm going to get that stuff done first, but then what do I want them to do next? And, you know, we would be, you know, often we would be saying, well, that's around your prime, isn't it? About, you know, making sure that this delivery, the things that you want your children to learn are being supported whilst they're with you. So it's very much about thinking that through and having a plan and making sure that you don't lose things, like, you know, those places that have got a lot of temporary staff, and that means that you've not got the key person always in post. So then providers thinking, okay, well, these are my children who I'm most worried about, so I'm going to make sure that they've got a key person who's always here. Other children who I'm not as worried about can, you know, I'm going to keep an eye on them, and these temporary people are going to report to me, but they can have those people. So it's really about prioritization. Actually, that's where we can see people sort of making the best progress through those difficulties.
And I think as well, CPD, continued professional development, and how leaders are managing that with staff is something else that comes through in that blog. So really worth a read. Yeah.
And just a point that we always make on this is when we talk about CPD or training, people always think it's about paying for somebody else.
Oh.
But actually, a lot of the time, it's about who are your most experienced people, you as the manager or you as the leader who's experienced, helping that person, coaching them, watching what they're doing and saying that was really good, but next time why don't you try doing this bit. That is probably some of the most powerful and often the cheapest of that CPD that you can get.
No, totally. Obviously, as you know, we work with so many early years practitioners, and we did the survey, and 70% of settings have said they're really struggling with recruitment at the moment in this sector. So that's a high number, which we need to recognise, because there's a mass exodus. Certainly when the younger kids can come into the sector, the pay is low, as you know. So really that is another area that is quite a concern for a lot of settings. But CPD as well, with Parenta as a training provider, that's one of the things we offer to all our settings, is that all the staff gets access to free CPD through a portal that we have. So yeah, that is something we've recognised already as well. Okay, on to another question. Could ongoing information be requested from providers rather than a 1 or 2 day visit?
I think that's an interesting question, actually, and I think that's the type of thing that we're wanting to hear about through that big listen. So, you know, Martin Oliver, our chief inspector, has said, you know, nothing's off the table. And that's the kind of thing, if that's something that people feel strongly about, then please do put that down on the big listen, because that's your opportunity to share that, and then we can, you know, consider it.
Brilliant. Okay. You mentioned this earlier about the handbook, and one of the questions, as you can imagine, is quite a lot of changes to the handbook, and you know, why is that?
I think ultimately that, you know, we look at the handbook, we review it it's an ongoing process, but actually, obviously, well, I say more recently, following the events at the end of last year and the prevention of future death report that we needed to submit, then those changes that have happened this year, January and April, are in direct response to some of those tragic events, so that we needed to make sure that some of those things were clear in our guidance.
I think it's great as well, just from that perspective, that you guys are so responsive, you know, and that's probably why there will be updates quite regularly to make sure that and people are listened to as well. So that's really comes across.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So we had a question from a childminder. As a childminder, how best can I support early years children who come to me after school day, after a full day at school or nursery for after school childcare?
I think that's about knowing your children, and as a childminder, you know, knowing those children and what they need once they've had a really busy day in school, or you know, at nursery, or wherever they may have been beforehand. Phil, did you want to pick up on that one?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, we would think, you know, if a child has been out learning all day in, you know, that environment, then actually what they need is a bit of a rest, a bit of downtime. They need to be comfortable and relaxed, and
they might need a snack.
Yep, a little snooze, maybe, or they're really keen to find out more about something because they're doing it. It's very much about knowing those children. Some children, if you try to get them to do anything when they get into home, it would just get really ratty, wouldn't they? So actually, those children need probably something to eat and a bit of downtime. Yeah, it's about meeting the needs of those children. That's what we'd be looking for.
Brilliant. Okay. Can you talk about the process for registering with Ofsted as a nanny?
I think the best thing to do in terms of process for registering as a nanny is, again, go and have a look at our blog. There's a blog about registration, and also all the information is on our website. So Google Ofsted register as a nanny, and you'll be guided through the process.
Brilliant. Okay. Sorry, there's a couple, maybe I'll ask two more. Can you talk us about the changes that Ofsted has made to improve its work and what providers should do on an inspection if they feel concerned about an inspector's behaviour? I think you alluded to about the complaints, but did you want to answer that?
Yeah, absolutely, and we've made some changes following that consultation that we did in the summer last year. And one of the things that's happened since January is that as part of the notification call, then inspectors will make the provider aware of a provider contact number that can be used during the inspection or 24 hours after the inspection. And that very much is around if there's anything that's unresolved concern that, you know, through that professional dialogue with the inspector that the provider might be worried about, they've got that opportunity to use that number.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so one last question because I'm aware of time. I've returned to an early years sector after maternity leave and welcome the changes that's been made. The nursery has implemented the changes and we find that it has a positive impact on all the children who attend. Will there be any future changes? Well, I know the answer to that, but do you want to go for that?
And I guess it depends on what changes we're talking about. And are we talking about the changes to the EYFS, or are we talking about changes to you know, how we go about our inspection there? So depending on what it is, whether it's, you know, the changes that DfE have been making, or whether it's some of our changes, I think we can definitely talk about the things that we're changing. And at the moment, I guess we've got part 3 of Best Start in Life coming out before the end of the summer. But the other thing, of course, that we've talked about is the Big Listen. So we will be taking some time to review and evaluate those findings. And ultimately, you know, we want to be a world-class inspectorate and regulator. So that potentially will lead to some changes for our work. Yeah,
Brilliant.
we can't say what that will look like until we've
No,
analysed all those results from the Big Listen.
The sort of changes that, I mean, one of the reasons that we have to change the handbook is if the EYFS changes, because it's our role is to inspect against, if you like, the EYFS, and of course that's the DfE's document. So when that changes, we sometimes have to tweak what we're doing, which is why you get those updates. But if we were to make more significant changes to the way that we do inspections, that's something that you know, who knows, that could come out of the Big Listen. We don't know at the moment, but that's a very, very big change that everyone would know about, and there'd be consultation, and there'd be, you know, we'd be trialing different sorts of inspection. At the moment, the way that we inspect will stay the same, and if it changes, you'll really know about it because it's quite a big thing for us to go through.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. We will also share the Big Listen to our subscriber base of over 50,000, so hopefully we can extend the reach for you guys as well. So I just wanted to say thank you for Wendy and Phil for joining us today. It's been fantastic, and we do appreciate your time, as well as all the practitioners who's given up the hour for today. Just join us next month on the 12th of June. We are another webinar which is going to be all about supporting children's wellbeing and mental health. So please do join us on the 12th of June. Thank you, everybody. This recording will be shared and sent out to everybody via email, and as well as on our YouTube channel, which we can view that afterwards. So do share that and extend the reach. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a fantastic day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.